Hi, I am so excited to do this video. My name is Jenna. I just finished filming 2 seconds ago the last little bit of my wrap-up video for my Victober reading. So if all of this looks familiar to you, it's because 2 seconds ago I was filming something different. But right now I'm switching gears. I'm very excited to talk about 2025. I'm very excited to talk about the Books Love Everyone book group that I am going to very excitedly host next year. If you follow me over on Bookstagram, then you will probably already know about this. I did post there first about a week ago, just to kind of get a feel. And then yesterday, I also invited some friends who I'm in a small book group kind of with on Facebook. And so I am kind of gathering my willing bookish people to read with me, to read some really great books. I've read about 2/3 of these books that I'm about to share with you as picks for next year. And some of them will be new to me, but I still think they're going to be really, really great. These are life-affirming, thought-provoking, human-centered stories. And what I am going to offer you, the offer you can't refuse, what I'm going to offer you is 2 books per month. You can choose whether you read both or whether you just read one of them. That's fine. You can still fully participate in the conversation that we will have, but 2 books per month, usually, in fact, every month except for 1 month, a fiction and a nonfiction that are somehow connected. Maybe thematically, maybe tone-wise, maybe author-wise, maybe subject matter-wise. They have some kind of connection, and I don't always fully know the complete connection. Like, I'm so excited to find out what things will come up during our conversation, but the goal is that we will take a month to read these 2 books, or if you only want to read the fiction, that's fine, or if you only want to read the nonfiction, also fine. And then we will discuss on the Fable app, which is completely free. All month long, we can discuss each of the reads on the Fable app. And then the first Saturday following the end of the month, we'll meet on Zoom for a friendly, moderated discussion about the book. And I think it's going to be really fun. I think it's going to be really great. This is super low stakes. If you only want to read the books and then watch the discussions, I'm not going to post the Zoom discussion, but I will post a recap of the discussion on this channel with just me, featuring just me. But the people who attend this Zoom discussion, I'm not going to put them on my channel. Maybe at some point we might do a special one and where everybody knows that that's the case. But for the most part, I want people to just feel free to come as they are, have a nice discussion, and then I'll report back here. So if you want to read the books and then just like follow along or comment down in the comments with that report back, that is absolutely fine. If you want to read one or both of the books and participate in Fable but not attend the Zoom, that's fine. If you want to read one or both of the books, participate in the Zoom but not on Fable, that's fine. If you want to do all the things, that's fine. If you only want to read with us in January, or if you only want to read with us in August, that's fine. If you want to read every single month and do all the things, also fine. Super low stakes, super low stakes. I do have some community rules that we will go over. You do have to be someone who follows my channel. You do have to be someone who interacts with me on some level. This is not just a free-for-all. And so when it comes time to receive the link for that month's Zoom, the link will always be unique to that month. And you will need to have given me your name and your email address in order to receive that entrance into that Zoom room. So I need to know you on some level. We don't need to be besties, but I do need to know you on some level. And then also when we are together in that space, we're going to be kind, generous, and respectful. I don't think I need to say those things to you. I think that you will actually already know that. It's the teacher in me. I just want to state the expectation ahead of time. I don't want you to be surprised. I will definitely reserve the right to remove anyone who cannot be kind, generous, and respectful. So if the idea of coming into a Zoom room with a bunch of strangers is a little bit daunting to you, please don't be daunted. I have had years of experience teaching on Zoom, and that was during the time when people could like pop in unexpectedly and take over your Zoom. Oh, the horror. And I think I have skills. I have skills. I also have moderation skills. Like everything in moderation, but moderator skills. So I think that I will be able to host just a really wonderful conversation. So I don't think you should be afraid of the Zoom if that's something that feels daunting to you. I also am super excited about all of these books. I plan to keep a commonplace book for these books because as I look over them, I feel like I inadvertently picked some through themes for the whole year. And I'm very excited about that. I'm really, really excited about what these books are going to reveal, about what our conversations are going to reveal. I read with some you are some very, very insightful people. I am so inspired by the things that you read and the comments that you bring, and I really want to add this layer of community, this layer of communication. I have said before, and I will say again, that I purposefully keep this community fairly small. I don't put up with anything. I put up with so much less on this channel than I do with like people who I meet in real life. So know that you'll be in a safe space. If you want to participate, you'll be in a safe space. And if you don't bring a safe vibe, you're gone. And please don't be offended by that. It's just the way that it is. I will run a tight ship. That doesn't mean that you have to agree. You don't have to agree. You just have to be respectful in your disagreement. So if you feel very differently about a book from somebody in the group, feel free to express that. That is one of the things that I'm really excited about, is hearing other people's experiences and kind of pulling together lots of varying ideas and perspectives and just walking away from these books, some of them my favorite books, with just an even greater, wider, broader scope of understanding and insight. I'm super excited about this. Please don't be intimidated by all the things that I just said. It can also just be a really good time. So I think we're going to laugh a lot. I think we're going to have a lot of opportunity to chat and get to know each other. And I think that this is going to be like a really sweet and edifying experience because these books, I think, are going to bring that out in our conversations, whether they be on Fable, whether they be in comments here on this channel, or whether they be in comments over on Bookstagram or in Zoom. I think that I'm very excited. I know I'm very excited about the possibilities. I anticipate that these meetings will be fairly small. I don't know how many people will actually be interested in all of these books or will be able to keep the commitment. I know I make commitments to things all the time and then go, ooh, actually, no, I don't want to do that. And I get that. But you can be confident that I'm going to read these books. I'm going to discuss them with somebody somewhere, somehow, and I'm going to report back to you the insights that came out of these. So I have picked the books for the whole year. If this is successful and people like this, I am super open to regular attenders picking books in 2026. But for this month, because for this year, for 2025, because I really wanted to set a tone, I went ahead and picked all of the books for 2025. We can do it different in 2026 if this continues into 2026. But for 2025, I've picked all the books. Most of them, a couple of them, one hasn't even been released yet, but I've read an arc of it. Several of them are new, but most of them are backlist titles, which I've already checked, and you can find online on sites like Abe Books, Better World Books, eBay, Thrift Books, for a very inexpensive price. And most of them, not all of them, but most of them are available on the two library platforms that I have, like my county library and my city library. Most of them are available through both of those avenues. So I would assume that they are probably available to you in most of your locations at most of your libraries, but I know that might be a very big assumption. But point being, I don't want anybody to feel like they need to spend a bunch of money to participate in this book group. So let's just go ahead and share the reads. So in January, we're going to read Jane Eyre and Praying with Jane Eyre. Now, first caveat here, none of these books, although they may have religious themes, none of these books are religious. This is Praying with Jane Eyre, despite the title, is a secular book. It is about finding sacred space, protecting sacred space, and reading as a sacred activity, reading of anything that you choose. So it is about developing a sacred practice, and that can be influenced by any belief system that you have or have not. So it's completely up to you how you interpret and view a lot of what is in this book. It is also a memoir. This is written by a Jewish woman who is an atheist and a chaplain at a hospital. So she's coming from a lot of different places and a lot of different perspectives, and she makes the commitment to read through the book of Jane Eyre start to finish over and over again. So she kind of makes it her religious text. And for people who have a hard time with some of the aspects of Jane Eyre, you might find it incredibly interesting why she picks Jane Eyre and how she goes about this. But she also talks a lot about how you can do this with any text that fits a certain kind of criteria. And I just really think that it's connected to Jane Eyre. So it was maybe an obvious choice. But B, I read this a few years ago, and it really influenced the way that I went about reading certain books and what I gave to the experience of reading. And I am always looking to create meaning. I'm always looking for meaning in everything. And that's kind of the focus of Praying with Jane Eyre. So if you don't have a religious belief system and you still want to participate in this, you aren't going to find this book difficult to apply to yourself. But of course, you could also skip it and just read Jane Eyre, or vice versa. If you feel like you've read Jane Eyre so many times, or if you just can't stomach Mr. Rochester, stab me in the heart. If you feel like you can't stomach Mr. Rochester, you don't have to read Jane Eyre. You could just read Praying with Jane Eyre. I will ask, though, that if you do want to participate in the Zoom, that you have read one of the books in the month that it was prescribed. So, yeah, we've got Jane Eyre, the classic. I will do another video at the beginning of the month or at the end of December, beginning of January, end of December, to remind you that this is our read for the month. But we've got Jane Eyre and Praying with Jane Eyre. The Fable book group is not open it's not accessible yet, although I have created it. I will open that up mid-December, and I will give you a reminder about that as well. In February, we have Madeleine L'Engle's adult novel, The Love Letters, and then we have Letters of a Portuguese Nun, which is this author's research into and what she believes to be proof that this nun actually existed. The Love Letters by Madeleine L'Engle is a dual timeline story about a woman in the 60s, which would be contemporary to the novel, but a woman in the 60s who loses a child. So there are trigger warnings for grief, but she loses a child and she thinks she's losing her marriage. And so she runs away to Portugal and she learns of this love story between this French soldier and this Portuguese nun, this forbidden love, and these letters that were written. These letters really exist. They were written in the 1500s, and then they were published as well in the 15 or 1600s. But so many people believed that this was just like, they're so passionate, they're so loving, they're so beautiful that many people believed that they were fabricated, that it was fiction. But the nonfiction book that we're going to read alongside the love letters by Madeleine L'Engle is this woman's fairly recent, I think 2009, 2010, research into the origin of the letters, and she thinks that she can prove that this nun is real. So it sounds fascinating to me. Love that. In March, we're going to give a nod to middle grade March, which I think a lot of people participate in, and so I didn't want to skip over that. So we're going to read MMK's middle grade fairy tale, The Ordinary Princess. This is one of my favorite books to read aloud. You can easily read it in one sitting. It is adorable. MMK is a woman who grew up overseas in India for the most part, and she's written some hugely long novels and a series of mysteries, but this is a beautiful, sweet, cute, fun, highly readable book about a young girl who is blessed with the gift of ordinariness at her birth and how her life unfolds from there. We're pairing that with a fairly new release. This was released this year in 2024. I have not read it yet, but it has been on my list. And it is Alan Townsend's memoir, This Ordinary Stardust. Again, we've got trigger warnings for loss. So this is a scientist's path from grief to wonder. And he is going to walk us through how he learns that both his wife and daughter are diagnosed with brain cancer. And it's his journey through faith and science, his knowledge of the world and how it works, to deal with grief and loss. So I haven't read it yet. I can't tell you much more about it than that, but the connection for these two books is the ordinary and how actually awe-inspiring and anything but ordinary our quote-unquote ordinary world and experiences are. Then we have, in April, we have translated fiction. One of these books, I've been wanting to read one for so long, and I haven't read any of them, but one of these kind of feel-good cat fictions coming out of Japan in translation. And so I've picked one. I have picked We Will Prescribe You a Cat. We'll Prescribe You a Cat. This is, I think, a series of short stories that are pulled together around a clinic where if you could find it, then it's like it's meant to be, and you have some kind of heartache or illness or situation that can be cured by a particular cat that will be prescribed to you. And so I think each chapter is a different story, but they're all pulled together by this clinic. And it sounds adorable, and it sounds wonderful, and it sounds inspiring, and I'm excited to finally get my eyes on one of these cat books. That is being paired with H is for Hawk, which is a memoir about a woman who turns to falconry to deal with the grief of losing her father. And I have not read this. I have started it twice for Nonfiction Novembers in the past, but I have not read it. And I would really like to read it and prioritize it. In May, we're going to read Niall Williams's This Is Happiness. I've never read fiction by this author, but I have read a really wonderful nonfiction about a year in his garden, basically. And it's beautiful. And I loved his writing, so I'm very much looking forward to reading a piece of fiction by him. This is about a small town and the people within it and how they support each other, and it's also somehow a love story, I think. So I think it's just a slow-paced, slice of life, beautiful novel called This Is Happiness, and we're pairing that with Melissa Harrison's The Stubborn Light of Things, a nature diary. I have read Melissa Harrison. I wanted to get her on this set of books for next year, but I wanted something that I hadn't read yet. So I've read Coming Through the Barley, I believe it's called, which is an adult novel written by her set in a rural village around World War II time. And that was harrowing coming of age novel. And then I have also read and absolutely love and highly recommend her two kind of fairy tale gnome centered books by Ash Oakenthorne and by Rowan and You. Those are such great books. Highly recommend the audio, and you can actually listen to them for free on Audible. The audio for those, there's music, full cast, so delightful. Absolutely highly recommend those. And I was thinking of putting them on this list for next year, but I wanted to read something I haven't read by her yet. And so I paired her with, I haven't read any of her nonfiction, and I know she had a podcast by the same name during the pandemic where she kind of tried to bring nature into people's homes. So I want to read this nature diary by her, The Stubborn Light of Things, which is a nonfiction, and I haven't read any nonfiction by her. And I want to read this fiction by this author that I haven't read any fiction from, only nonfiction. Very excited about this. They're both very nature and place centered, and they're both UK authors. So lots to connect them there. And then in June, we're going to go very American Midwest. We're going to read Hannah Coulter by Wendell Berry. I love Wendell Berry's poetry and his essays, and I've never read any of his fiction. And I know that Hannah Coulter is not the first book in this series, but I do believe that you can jump in anywhere in the series. And I think Hannah Coulter's number 7. I've picked Hannah Coulter because it's the first book that he wrote from the voice of a female character, and it is about the land. It's about the land. It's about the love of the land. It's about farming. It's about farming dying. It's about the Midwest dying. It's about like a way of life dying or being challenged, and the hope when the younger generation returns. So I am very much looking forward to this. I trust Wendell Berry's ability to tell me a good story in a beautiful way. And even though the subject matter is not necessarily something that I would normally gravitate towards, I am fascinated by what he's going to possibly do with it. So Hannah Coulter is paired with The Dirty Life, which is a memoir about a woman who was a journalist. I've been wanting to read this for so long. I've owned this book and have not read it yet. But it is about a woman who was a journalist, and she goes to a working farm to interview the farmer there, and they fall in love, and they kind of like impulsively decide that they're going to start this new farm up in, I believe, like Maine or Vermont or somewhere. And their goal is to raise enough livestock and fruits and vegetables to feed an entire community. And they accomplish that. And so this is the story of that, how this city girl marries this country boy, and they have this dream that they make happen that actually kind of changes some people's worlds. And I'm very interested in this. So super excited to read both of those together. In July, a lot of people do Jane Austen July. I didn't want to step on anybody's toes. And also, these are 2 great books about Jane Austen that I'm super excited to share with people. So we've got the sci-fi book, The Jane Austen Project, which I read multiple years ago. I think I read it in 2016 or 2017. And it is about 2 scientists from the future. Yes, they're scientists, but one is a scientist and one, do I remember this correctly? One is a scientist and one is an actor? I don't remember, but 2 people from the future who are tasked with returning to the past to find a couple of things. They need to find out and confirm what was Jane Austen's actual cause of death, and they need to find the manuscript, a lost manuscript of Jane Austen, so they can release another Jane Austen book into the world. In order to do this, they have to travel it through time, they have to go back, and they have to meet Jane Austen, and they think with Jane Austen will be through her brother Henry. So we really get to see Henry and Jane and London and all sorts of things through the perspective of people who are highly educated on life back then, but now having to live life back then. I just remember this book being so well done. It could have been campy, it could have been cheesy, it could have been cheaply done, but it was so well done. It is so well written. It has so much heart and insight. And I just remember thinking, wow, I need to read this again. And I never did. And so I'm excited to read this in conjunction with other readers. And I'm pairing it with an arc that I got. This is not releasing until February of 2025. By the time we get to it, it will not be brand new. Libraries should have it, and it should be more easily accessible via a library, or you can, of course, purchase a new copy of it. But this is the newest of all of the reads that I have on this list because I have had access to an ARC and loved this book. So this is Jane Austen's Bookshelf. And the author of this is a assessor on I believe the British version of Antiques Roadshow. She is a antique book collector, and she has made it her life's mission to find copies, to preserve copies of the books that influenced Jane Austen by female writers. But not only that, to bring these female writers back to the forefront, to figure out what happened to them, why we lost them. They were such powerful influencers of their society in their time, and now many of them are forgotten completely. A handful still read, but mostly forgotten. And these were powerhouse women, powerhouse social influencers of their day. And so each chapter is devoted to a different author who we know greatly influenced Jane Austen and her writing and her life and the choices that she made and the woman she becomes. Very, very fascinating stuff. Really into this kind of thing, and hopefully you are too. And then we have in August, this is our only month where both of our choices are the same genre in a way. Both of them are non-fiction. So first we have some journals by Dorothy Wordsworth. And we're pairing that with a biography, The Ballad of Dorothy Wordsworth. The journals I've read, and they're delightful and beautiful and thought-provoking, but I didn't feel, and you do feel like you get to know Dorothy and her world and her brother and the people, the romantics that populate their life. But it is very internal. It is her journal. I'm a poet. It's very internal. It is her journal. But you don't really get to know Dorothy. You get to know the way she sees the world, but you don't really get to know her. And I think she is a fascinating human being. I only know bits and pieces, little snippets from here and there, but I want to know her more. And so there were several different biographies to choose from. I went with this one because people said this reads like, or common comments said that this reads a little bit like a novel, and I want to give readers that opportunity to read something that feels like fiction, even though both of the choices in August are going to be non-fiction. Obviously, the thing that pulls them together is Dorothy Wordsworth, who is the sister of William Wordsworth. We know William, but William would not be William without Dorothy. These two were inseparable for her entire life. People who have like memories of her, or people who wrote about her being quite a wild person, like making these kind of strong decisions. And she does remain single to take care of her brother for her entire life. And then he goes and gets married to a family friend, and she nearly dies. Like, she nearly dies of a broken heart because of this. And I don't think there's anything weird about their relationship. I think that they were just very close, and she made the decision to make him the focus of her life, his success, the focus of her life. And then he goes and marries somebody, and which is fine, but it kind of breaks her. And I want to know more about her. She also had some chronic illness, and I want to know more about that as well. I want to hear her voice in the journals, but I want to know her story from the biography. In September, we're going to read something that might feel a little bit different from the other texts that I have been picking, but it's really not. It's really the same. This is the trilogy, and I am going to encourage everybody to read all 3 parts of the trilogy from this omnibus, which provides you access to all 3 of them, but you can also get them individually. But the omnibus has an extra story in it, and so I would highly encourage you to pick up the collected trilogy that is Binti. by Nydia Okorafor. If you have not read this, this is a science fiction coming of age story about culture and society and womanhood and friendship and education and ethnocentricity and peace and war and compassion and empathy and identity. It is a powerhouse of a set of little tiny stories. It starts with the future. A woman who is the daughter of the chief of a group of people in Africa that are really tied to the land. In fact, they're so tied to the land that they cover their face with the soil of the land. And she has decided that she wants to do something that nobody in her people group, nobody in her culture has ever done. She wants to leave the land, get on a spaceship, go to a different planet to go to university. While traveling there, dealing with a lot of cultural bias and race issues, while traveling there, her ship gets attacked by space pirates, by another culture, another entity, and things unfold from there. That's as much as I'll say. It is a beautiful book that is very human-centered and has much for us to reflect on about our own lives and our own society and the way that we deal with culture and our own culture and other people's culture. It's a brilliant book. It's also highly readable and beautiful. Love this. This is the book that made me fall in love with Nydia Okorafor and her writing. Just this book has so much to offer, and it may feel very different from something that you normally read, but let's read it together and see what it's really about. And I'm pairing that with a set of essays that's about all those things that I just talked about, as far as like ethnocentricity and racism and identity and culture and community and love, all those things. So we've got a set of essays called This Is One Way to Dance. I've never read this set of essays, but I'm really intrigued by what I have read about it. And I know that when I find a set of essays that works for me, it works so good. Rebecca Solnit can do this for me. Catherine Nuremberger can do this for me. And then when it doesn't work, it really doesn't work. So I'm going into this one with a grain of salt. I have not read from this author before, but I'm very intrigued by what I have learned about this, not only the set of essays, but this woman. So I think that these two books are going to complement each other very nicely, even though they are vastly different from each other. They're dealing with the same themes. So very, very interested in reading those together. In October, I am not doing Victober because I don't think everybody does Victober. A lot of people do Victober, but not everybody does Victober. And a Victorian book can be really off-putting to people who don't choose to read Victorian literature regularly. Some people think that Victorian literature is not enjoyable. I don't understand that. But to each their own. So I'm not assigning you a Victorian anything assigning. This is my teacher language coming out. We're not picking a Victorian book. We're going for the spooky vibes, but this is like reality spooky vibes. So I've picked a play to read. I've taught this play so many years. I've read this play so many times. And I only say that not because I don't think there's anything left for me to find in it, because I think there's so much left for me to find in it, but because I want you to understand that this is one of the most highly readable plays that I've ever read. This is Arthur Miller. If you've read any Arthur Miller, you know he writes plays, but oh my goodness, these plays are so fleshed out. The characterization is there for you. Their movements are there for you. The setting is really beautifully laid out for you. We will read this from beginning to end. We will read. I'm going to suggest that you get the Penguin Classics version and that you read the play and then you go back and you read the introduction. That's how I'm going to suggest that we read this, because it's all together, tied together, a thing of beauty. And it is about the Salem witch trials. It takes place during the Salem witch trials. But it is actually about the McCarthy hearings that happened in the United States during the Red Scare following World War II, following the end of World War II, where the United States, thanks to some people in government, became incredibly terrified of the idea of communism. And we are going to pair this with a wonderful biography that I read a couple of years ago as an ARC by Anne Seba. This is Ethel Rosenberg. And if you are not familiar with the Rosenbergs, these are two individuals who were sentenced to death, died by electrocution in the United States as a result of these trials because they were accused of being communist spies. And this book takes you through the life of Ethel Rosenberg, the trials, the effect on their family. They had children. So pairing these two books together is really not as antithetical as it might appear. And it is scary stuff. It's super scary stuff. It's just not horror stuff, and it's not Victorian stuff. So that's October. In November, we've got two books I've never read before. Both of them I've never read from either author, but I'm very interested in both of them. So first we have A Quiet Life, which is a book about three individuals, both dealing with different griefs. Somehow their stories intersect. And this is just supposed to be a really beautiful, gentle, quiet hug of a book. And we're going to pair that with Stalking the Divine, which is a memoir about a woman who kind of lost her faith. I think she was raised Catholic, and then she became an atheist. But then she has this moment where she attends this church service where she learns about this group of nuns. That's what happens. She learns about this group of nuns called the Poor Clares, who have devoted themselves to praying for the grief of others. The pain, the loss, the sadness, the grief, the loneliness that others go through. And they've devoted their entire lives to kind of taking on and carrying this grief and trying to pray the release of it for the world. And she spends years, the author of this book spends years having conversations with these nuns about this practice, about their life choices, about how they end up where they are. And I'm just very, very, very into this. So these are two books about grief and quietness and communication and empathy and support and love and community. Very excited about reading that in November together. And then ending the year on kind of a flashy note, I've picked a fantasy. I believe it's a YA fantasy that I have not read before, but I've heard such great things about this. And it just felt right. I didn't want to pick a book that is particularly Christmas focused because there may be people who don't celebrate Christmas who would like to join in, but I definitely wanted to pick something with a little glitz, a little glam, a little light, because there are so many festivals of lights during the month of December, during the winter time. And so I picked The Gilded Wolves, which is the first book in a fantasy series. It takes place in the 80s, in Paris, with a kind of found family. It's a heist book, I believe, and it takes place during the Paris World's Fair, the World's Fair where the Eiffel Tower was unveiled and where the Eiffel Tower became something that we can't imagine the universe being without at this point in our lives. But there was a point where it didn't exist, and then it did exist. And there was a point where it got a ton of criticism because, oh my goodness, it's an eyesore. And I still think it's an eyesore. Like when I went to Paris, I was not super enthusiastic about this iron sculpture, but I can't imagine Paris without it, right? Can you? And so there is that, but then we're going to pair it with Eiffel's Tower, which is the only book about Eiffel and his tower, and that Parisian World Fair that was first written in English. So this is not a biography, but more of a history of that moment in time. And it is also dealing with found family. There's no heist, but it's going to talk a lot about the things that are going on in that moment, the people who are at this fair, the things that are happening at this fair, the things that are unveiled at this fair. including Eiffel and his tower, the reaction of people to this tower. I think it's just going to be absolutely fascinating. And then to read it in conjunction with a story that's taking place at the same time, but which is very, very fantastical and fantasy driven, but is also about these larger than life characters. So you've got one book that's about these real life, larger than life historical figures. And you've got this book that's about these fictional, larger than life figures. They're both in the same setting at the same time. Fascinating. I think it'll be fascinating and fun and really kind of a warm, engaging, pacey read for December. And that'll take us through the year. And I really hope that you want to join me. So, yeah, if you have questions or anything, put them down in the comments. If you have read any of these books and are excited about them, let me know. If you've read them and you hated them, please keep that to yourself. I would appreciate that. And yeah, this is going to happen. We're going to start this. And I'm hoping to read some of these, if not all of these, with you sitting right there. You. Yeah, you. Let's go read.